got here Dean Rob Schwartz, UCLA Law Admissions. How you doing, Rob?
I'm doing well, Steve. Good to see you.
Good to see you as well. Just to clarify for folks, although we have the same last name, no relation, I feel like we have to specify that.
Not that we know of. You never know.
Not that we know of, but to avoid apparent conflicts of interest, perhaps always important in the legal profession. So this is an interesting year. As you were saying, Rob, this is a year of flexibility. We've got obviously the LSAT Flex, and you were just sharing with me some stats about survey results about schools taking May and June LSAT Flex scores for the cycle that has pretty much finished up, given that law school starting in a couple of weeks. You want to share some of the juicy details on that?
Yeah, sure. It's pretty recent. The Law School Admissions Council surveyed admissions professionals, and this was as of early June. So at that point, 89% of the respondents, and there were about more than 170 law schools responded, 89% said that they were accepting the May LSAT Flex, and another 78%, or 134 schools, said that they were going to accept the June LSAT Flex. So, yeah, I thought that was pretty interesting. And, a good number of schools tried to be flexible this year as best they could by extending their application deadlines due to COVID as well.
Right. So, I mean, definitely schools are being more flexible. I got the impression largely that schools are pretty understanding of all the crazy circumstances going on this year, whether it's simply transitioning from the digital format to the flex format. And I remember last year when you and I connected, we were talking about going from the paper to the digital, and you were indicating that you're kind of understanding of the fact that it's a new format. And now, yet again, we have another format.
Yeah.
So I feel like they're understanding of the flex, both the format, the tech issues, and then just in general, like all the chaos around the spring semester, how that kind of was thrown for a loop with moving online. I mean, what's your take on all of this, understanding regarding what the position applicants are in? How do you view the typical applicant who's kind of been tossed around by all this?
That's hard. I feel like, on the admission side, we've been tossed around a little bit, but I think it's probably worse on the applicant side. I think what I feel is the hardest thing for applicants is just not being able to visit schools in person. I always say to them that visiting a school is so important. So, admissions offices have tried to put together, like, we offer a virtual tour, we do all sorts of programming online, but it's not the same as an in-person visit and being on campus. So I think that is the hardest thing. I don't have any personal experience with the LSAT. You probably know better than me, but it seems to me that the LSAT Flex hopefully is a better experience for applicants, I would think, right? Because it's one less section, and they can take it from the comfort of their own home. So to me, it seems like a good thing. And now that the LSAT's being offered more, it seems like generally a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, assuming that everything goes smoothly with the tech and the ProctorU and all of that, and scores don't get lost, as happened for a small number of people.
Yes.
I mean, that's generally a pretty smooth experience. 3 sections, not 5, from your own home, assuming good internet and quiet home environment. I think it's generally smooth for the majority of people.
Right.
But I think it's just generally the uncertainty of the new format. And then obviously the issues that happen get a disproportionate amount of attention because on the internet, the people with problems tend to make noise. But I think issues like the lost scores or proctors being confused should never happen. But I get the sense that LSAC is trying to resolve that and knock it out so that folks taking August and October will have a much smoother experience. But I'm sure that anybody if somebody did have an issue with any of the Flex administrations, would you generally recommend writing an addendum to share a little bit about what happened?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think more than ever, schools are going to be understanding about that. On our application at UCLA, we actually have a question which says, is there anything you want to share with us about your standardized test taking experience? So that would be the perfect place to do it. You don't even have to write a separate addendum. You can just answer that question. And, I think applicants should keep in mind that schools are going to put significant weight on their higher score. So if they have a bad experience, not that I'm sure people are not dying to take this test multiple times, but if you need to, that's always a possibility too.
Yeah. And let's say you see an applicant who they took it in the past on maybe digital, on the tablet or paper a year or so back or more, and then they take the Flex, something happens. If they took it a third time or a fourth time, how would you look at that given the context of different formats?
Well, I think it's certainly fine to do. I mean, I think people know what they're you have an idea of what they're capable of scoring. And if they're not getting in that range, they should take it. They should take it again. I think where I worry more and where it might have more of a negative impact on admissions, and our committee feels this way, is if there are some people that take the test a lot of times,
What's a lot? Define a lot.
8, 10, 12 times, it's sort of like, every month. I mean, what's happening? I mean, obviously there's a limit to how many they can take it, but maybe it's over even a couple of year period. So we sort of wonder what's going on there. But, as you say, 3, 4 times, I think, I'm sure you would agree, you want to go into the test as prepared as you can be, but hopefully it makes you feel a little calmer to know that if you don't have a good day, if you have things that happen that are irregular with the test, you can always do it again if you have to.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. I mean, retaking, you can always retake. It's nearly every month, but you don't want to take it every single month over the course of an entire year. Now the new retake limits are reinstated once again, whether October or November is a flex or not. I think they're both going to be flex, but either way, those retake limits are back in place. I mean, what I'm telling people right now at this moment in time, as we speak in around mid-August, is if somebody is looking at the August LSAT end of this month, approximately 3 weeks from now or 2 weeks from now, and they're not feeling ready, I'm telling them, hey, just go for October instead. Go for November instead. They could still apply this cycle. What do you think of that?
Absolutely. That's great advice. I mean, it's interesting. People, I get emails even today, our application opens on September 1st. They want to apply early and they say, but I'm thinking of taking the October LSAT, and is the 1 month difference going to make a difference? And it is not going to make any difference at all. What people have to realize is that if you're applying any time, certainly before Thanksgiving, even December, you're in the earlier stage of the application process. At UCLA last year, this past cycle, we had over 6,000 people apply, and I would say close to, if not just a little bit in excess of 1,000 of those come in at the very last day or two. So that's when you're applying late. Right.
And would you say that's shifted over time? I feel like 10 years ago or so that it was viewed a little bit differently. Like December was later then than it is now. Would you agree with that? That's a shift that I've kind of noticed in the way people talk about things, at least.
So you're saying 10 years ago, applying in December was considered earlier?
Was considered later than it is now.
Later. Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah, absolutely.
So the cycle's kind of extended longer overall now. Like we were saying in that survey, like they're taking June LSAT flex scores to start law school 2 months later.
Yeah. Every law school is different. That's the most important moral of all this, right? There's 200 law schools in this country. There's a wide variety of the way admissions decisions are made. And so really, as a prospective student, you got to do your homework. You need to look into the schools you're considering. You should ask these questions because there's going to be a wide variety of approaches. There may be some schools that are very strict about accepting later LSAT scores and others that are going to be wide open. So it runs the gamut, but I would agree with you as a general matter. Yeah, the cycle has definitely gotten long.
Yeah, there's definitely wide variety there. But yeah, the overall is good to know about too. By the way, folks, feel free to ask questions in the chat. We'll work them into the conversation at any point. Rob, I'm interested to hear about UCLA. I'm sure folks are wondering UCLA law specifically, since you can speak to that, I would imagine. What's your, I would hope so. What's your take on the cycle for you? What do you consider late and how do you view things?
Well, in a normal year, and even this past year, I think, applying, if you can get your application in before the 1st of January, I recommend it. If you do it before the 1st of December, even better. But I always caution to say what's most important is to get it in when it's the strongest application. So, if you don't do well on the October LSAT, you didn't perform up to your expectations, you're going to take the test later, you're better off waiting and applying with a stronger LSAT score. But all things else equal, I would be trying to get it in. I wouldn't wait an extra month to be doing multiple drafts of your personal statement, right? That you could hopefully be organized enough to get that in and get that done a little bit ahead of time.
Right. And you mentioned the example of somebody who wants to apply September 1st, but they're taking the October LSAT. To me, that doesn't make a lot of sense because you can't really evaluate the application till that score comes in, right? So they're kind of required to, let's say the October LSAT, even if it's a flex, and it's still going to be early October, I imagine, scores come back 2 weeks later. So they're not really able to submit until mid to late October anyway, which means that you can't evaluate it till then, but no big deal. It's still relatively early.
Exactly. It makes no difference to us. An application, if it's submitted, is just going to sit until it's complete. And it's not going to make a difference. It's not going to make a difference if you apply on September 1st, October 1st, November 1st. You're all in that general early pool.
General early pool. Yeah. Now, a question I've been getting a lot lately from students, and I see we've even got one in the chat from Alyssa about like how COVID affects things. So COVID, obviously, we have the impact on the spring semester of college, maybe even summer classes. Then, of course, the fall, I imagine it will impact folks a lot there. Just speaking on the academic side, now we can get into the work experience side. How do you view folks, grades, given that situation that's been going on pretty much most of 2020 at this point?
Yeah, well, it's interesting, right? Because I think I'll have a lot more to say about that in a year from now, right? Because we're about to go into a cycle where we're going to be seeing these things, right? We didn't see a lot of it this year. Many schools went online in March. Most of our admissions decisions were made already. So there hasn't been a lot of that. I guess I would just reiterate that the admissions committee, would want to see and understand any specific circumstances that happened as a result of COVID. And I mentioned earlier, we have a question about standardized test taking. We also have a question about academic performance. Did anything impact your academic performance? And that would be a perfect place to write in about COVID. And my understanding is that it's all over the map in terms of what schools did. Some schools still offered grades. Some schools went pass-fail. People may have had personal, difficult, challenging circumstances. God forbid, maybe a sick family member, or just weren't able to be in a good environment for studying. So all of those things are things that an admissions committee would want to know about. Yeah,
that's reasonable. It's good to hear that you're open to that sort of context. And I'm wondering, I could imagine you're going to get a lot of these sorts of statements, and at a certain point, they might start to look cliche, where you've seen 1,000 iterations of the same thing.
We may. I guess we'll see. We'll see how many we get. I think each would be taken seriously, though, and on its merits, and we would do the best we could to evaluate the files as they are and under people's circumstances. We're still going to have a lot of academic performance that we're going to be able to see from people in quote unquote normal times. So, we'll have that too, but we'll certainly take into account any specific circumstances.
Well, let's say if we try to compare this to anything that's even remotely similar, like let's say 2008 financial crisis, you might have gotten a handful of personal statements or addenda regarding how people were impacted in their professions. And I imagine you might have gotten a number of essays on that topic, or going back even further, maybe how 9/11 might have impacted people in some way. And I imagine, again, a lot of essays on the same topic. So I'm wondering, given that comparison, or just in general, what we could expect, what might stand out and what might make you kind of sigh and you're like, oh, another one?
It's a good question. And I do recall, I've been doing this long enough. I'm embarrassed to say that I recall, and I used to work at a law school in New York. So, there were a lot of personal statements about 9/11, but, each one is different, right? Because these circumstances impact people differently. And I guess I feel, at least today, maybe 2 years from now, I'd say something different, that far be it for me to say, don't write about that topic because everybody else is writing about that topic, because the personal statement is personal and it's about something you want to share with the admissions committee. And I think it's important to have in there something about why you're going to law school. So I could imagine a personal statement which weaves in the circumstances of COVID that's appropriate. I could imagine one where maybe it would have been better left to an addendum, where if you're just talking about its impact on you academically. But like you mentioned, the financial crisis, one of the factors we generally consider is work experience. But if somebody was impacted in the 2008 recession or is impacted now and not able to get a job, clearly that's something the admissions committee is going to have to take in and want to take into account.
Right. No, that's good to hear. Now, let's say we got a question in the chat regarding the resume. So in 2020, let's say they graduated college in May. might have a tough time finding a job for the summer or the fall or beyond, or just they might have lost their job or any situation. What are you looking for on their resume? And if you see a gap in their resume, what are you thinking? Do they need to explain that?
I think they could address it. It doesn't have to be long, but it could be a brief explanation if they were having difficulty due to the economy, finding a position. That's something we'd be happy to know about. I also think it's, how to use your time. Maybe instead you read, an interesting book that you want to share with us that further got you interested in going to law school, or any one of a number of other experiences that you had in that time. I mean, I'm just off the top of my head. Maybe I've been talking to some people. Maybe you got to spend more time with your family in a way that you never would have had this not happened. And so maybe that's a topic for a personal statement. None of this is right or wrong. I'm just saying there's always things that you can write about. And I always feel that you're better served just being yourself through this process, and you will shine through, and you will find a law school that is for you. And to try to sit there and rack your brain and think of, well, what am I going to say that's going to impress an admissions committee is, I think, a waste of time. Just be yourself and talk about you and your experiences and how you've gotten to this point. That's all you can do.
Yeah, and I would imagine being unique, being authentic is automatically going to make you more unique than if you try to put yourself in a box of saying, oh, I read every legal book there was or something. Or I'm imagining people going through John Grisham novels or maybe something more academic.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I think what people don't realize is that they truly are unique. They are, just by being themselves. And so just share that with us. That's what we want to know.
We're getting a lot of questions in the chat regarding deferments and deferrals. So
yeah, I saw that, and I have some stats from the survey I was talking about.
Yeah, let's get into those.
I too thought that we might receive many more requests for deferrals, and we really have not. Now it's interesting, right? We have received obviously more requests because of COVID, because there was no COVID a year ago, but we've also received less requests of other kinds of deferrals, like, for example, I got a job, So it turns out that the number of people deferred, at least at UCLA, to the fall of 2021 is about the same as was deferred a year ago now. So I assume people are asking because they're anxious about, are there going to be all these seats that are already taken up in next year's class? And the answer, at least for us, is no. And if I can find it relatively quickly on this survey, again, this was in early June, so it is not now, but even then, it was not a majority of schools that were reporting an increase in deferrals. And I'll keep looking in a second. I should be able to give you the exact number, but it certainly mirrors my own experience at UCLA. The result was that the majority of schools were not seeing an increase in the number of people requesting deferrals.
Oh, so that's good news for those applying this fall, I imagine.
Exactly. And that's I think the most important takeaway at this point. I think schools are aware of that. They you don't want to defer half of your class. The other thing we've seen, which is interesting though, is more people actually asking to apply late this year because they were going to go to law school in the fall of 2021, but they, for whatever reason, have decided this is a good time to go. Maybe a lot of people are not excited about remote learning, but they're thinking the long term. They're thinking 3 years, and so they want to get going. And in fact, here I'm seeing in the survey, 1/3 or 19% reported extending the application for all students as a response to COVID-19. And another 43% were not certain at that time. So, there were a lot of people that were considering that.
Right. Very interesting. Now, I imagine, has UCLA, go ahead, did you find something?
Sorry, Sorry. No, I'm sorry. There's a lot of data here, so I'm trying to make my way through it and give it to you. But if I find it, I'll let you know.
All right,
but I know it confirms what I just said.
Perfect. Cool. I guess I'm wondering, has UCLA Law made a decision for this fall yet, or for this academic year?
Yes. Well, we actually start in 3 days. So we have orientation on Thursday, and for the fall, we're going to be going completely remote. We had a plan in place for a sort of a hybrid environment with a limited in-person enrollment, but given the increase in COVID cases in LA, a couple weeks ago now, the dean made the decision that we would go completely virtual. The faculty has actually been spending a lot of the summer in remote teaching workshops, learning how to best provide that. And we've actually changed our 1L curriculum a little bit so that there's going to be much smaller classes. And I think that'll help too with the Zoom learning.
No, that's fantastic that you're doing that. I imagine that would give students a lot of comfort to know that the experience is going to be as rich as possible.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, we'll see how it goes. I mean, we did do a survey. 300 students responded to it last spring, asking them what worked, what didn't work. And so we went through that. We had a task force. And so I think we're going to do it as well as it can be done, but we'll see how it goes.
No, that's cool that you're going online. I'm sure I get the sense that a lot of students prefer online and don't want to go in person. That's just what I'm anecdotally hearing.
Yeah, before we announced it, we did a survey, and I would say probably about 30% of the incoming class said under any circumstance, they had the option to go completely remote if they wanted to, and 30% at that point said they would go completely remote. And then maybe another 20% weren't sure. So, I think the thought of sitting in a classroom wearing a mask is not very appealing.
Nah. I'm wondering, I've got a couple of questions in the chat and then just in general regarding people asking if tuition would be impacted at all by school being online, or would tuition remain the same as it otherwise would?
Yeah, we get in that question a lot, especially from our current students who actually did a great job advocating. And actually, our dean recently announced a scholarship to all students of it comes out to about $1,200 the way it works out. It's not a lot.
Like a stimulus check.
Yeah, sort of like a stimulus check. The unfortunate reality is that the expenses that the law school incurs are not significantly changed because of online learning. If anything, there's some increased expenses, and most of the expenses are salaries. And so if we were to significantly do that, it would mean layoffs or furloughs of staff. And so it's a challenging situation because we recognize that students are not getting the same experience that they otherwise would, but at the same time, it's not really significantly savings funds. So my understanding, at least, is that the majority of law schools have not significantly changed their tuition for this coming year.
Right. It makes sense. A lot of the costs are fixed, especially salaries.
But some of the fees, have been scaled back because if you're not going to have those services, but those are generally smaller.
Yeah. You mentioned that a lot of class sizes would actually be smaller with the optimizing the remote learning Zoom experience. That's interesting because I would have thought that aside, maybe it would actually be possible to increase class sizes with online learning, although that obviously removes a certain personal aspect. Have you heard about that being floated anywhere, about schools increasing sizes, even if not at UCLA?
So actually that was in the survey too. And I actually had it right up. So as of late May, early June, most respondents reported no change in their projected enrollment. Less than a third reported that the number of students projected to enroll would be less than enrolled in 2019. So 19% of respondents said they expected their classes to be larger. 52% said it would be the same. 30% said smaller. So the majority, a little more than half, are the same or smaller. So I think, even though you're right, schools could increase enrollment, assuming we go back to in-person learning. at least at a school like UCLA, there's limits on how much room there is literally in the classroom. So we can't enroll more than we have room for. So that would be a problem.
Right, because then there's the issue, well, if you enroll that many and then next year it's in person again, you suddenly don't have enough space on campus in person to do it all.
Yeah, exactly. And we're hoping that by January we'll hopefully be in person too. So we'll see, but that's the hope.
Right, of course. Now, I've gotten recurring questions around like how to network as a law school student when things are online. And I guess we could speak about this even in an admissions context about how can folks connect with you or kind of get those good notes in their file, so to speak.
Well, I guess starting with the latter one, I would encourage people to sign up for tours, just like in some ways it's easier to connect, right? I mean, I don't think it's interesting. This may change the way we do admissions forever. I mean, when you think about it, a year ago, if somebody was in New York or Kansas or wherever, we really weren't scheduling meetings like this on Zoom, but nobody was even really asking for it. And now I think, well, why should we not always make this kind of service available? So in the past, I mean, somebody could always email me, but you typically had to come to LA and take a tour and visit and then sit down and meet with me. We never offered these kinds of options. And why not? So in some ways, it's easier to connect. And so we offer virtual tours. You can come, you could take a tour, then you can meet with us. You could ask any questions that are on your mind. I don't want people to have the impression that fact is going to have a significant impact on an ultimate admissions decision, but hopefully it is a service that will enable people to get the questions answered that are on their mind. And find out more about our school and the process and just any questions that they have. So that's how you can do it. And in some ways it's easier. And I think all fall we'll be conducting many virtual events. The Law School Admissions Council has announced, I think at least 3, if not 4 now, big virtual forums. And we'll be at all of those. All law schools will be at those. That's going to be a great way to connect with admissions staff, alumni, faculty, students, all of that. So I think in some ways it might be easier because you don't have to necessarily get on a plane and go out and visit.
Right. So I'm getting the sense there's a few different ways that students can connect with schools. There's these virtual tours. There's maybe setting up one-on-one Zoom video calls with members of the admission office. Yep. And then there's LSAC's virtual forums similar to the previous in-person forums where they would hold them in these big event spaces in major cities like New York, DC, where there would be tons of tables and dozens of law schools. Am I kind of laying out those 3 options correctly?
Correct. And I guess I'd add a 4th. A lot of colleges are, just like they would normally hold an in-person law fair, they're holding them virtually. So depending on where you went to school, it may be worth checking with your pre-law office, your pre-law advisor to see if they're holding anything like that. One question that's been on my mind that I haven't been able to focus on is, and I don't know the answer, is, if UCLA, for example, undergrad is holding an event, is that going to be open to the public? And I don't know. It's a good question. When there was a fair, I think anybody could walk in, and so I don't know. That'll be an interesting thing. And if it is open, then we'll advertise those on our website. Right.
Cool. So the virtual tours, what's that like? I assume that's a live tour and not a video. Is it live?
We have both, right? We have a virtual tour on our website, but we also do a live virtual tour, which is either an admissions person like myself or when school is in session, a student, and we just show pictures and kind of do the tour as we would if we were walking you around in the same order, show you the pictures of where you would have been, what we would have said, and then at the end, take questions from anybody that has any about the admissions process or the school.
Nice. That's cool that you're doing that. And then I feel like the Zoom one-on-one calls are fairly self-explanatory, but then the LSAC fairs, I don't know how much you can speak about this since maybe it's a new thing, but I'm curious to hear more about what they're doing for that online. Is it panels? Is it like a full day of back-to-back presentations? What's that going to look like?
Yeah, as best I understand it, it's all of the above. So there will be panels that people can join in on, everything from, the Law 101, the application process, to financial aid, to just opportunities to ask admissions people questions, and then the opportunity, just like you would if you were at the physical event, to go from booth to booth to booth and meet with representatives and ask any questions that you have. I have not had a chance yet to really delve into it, so I don't know if it would be like if you were standing in a line 20 deep in New York to get at the table. I hope that won't be the case and that people will be able to get right in. But I suppose it depends on demand and how many people we have that are able to speak to people. So I haven't really been able to look at the platform yet. But from what I understand, it's going to be pretty well done. It seems like a great, good technology, and hopefully people won't have to wait long. But on the other hand, right, when you have a physical forum in New York, well, generally, it's people that are there. But now anybody could join in, so maybe they'll be much more crowded than usual. So I have no idea, really no idea what to expect. But I think what we will do is try to have the maximum number of representatives we can have, so that people don't have to wait. At a physical forum, we're limited to 3 people behind the table. Here, my understanding is we'll be able to have more than that.
Nice. And folks can always just book a one-on-one anyway if they have.
Yeah, if you're waiting, you can do that. The way we generally do that is you sign up for a tour, and then afterwards we can answer any questions. And if it's really personal, you can hang around and wait to speak to us.
Right. Now, what sort of questions do you like to get in those one-on-one meetings, and what kinds of questions are you wishing that somebody had just gone to the FAQ on your website?
Yeah, that's good. That's good. I mean, I find generally most of the time, at least in recent years, that the questions we get are pretty sophisticated and not the stuff that's on the FAQs. So I can't really think off the top of my head of there really aren't any, everything is fair game. I think whatever is on your mind, you should feel free to ask. It's not like we're taking notes and saying, that was a dumb question. If you have the question, you need the answer. So we should provide it. We want to be as transparent as possible and answer whatever questions you have about the process. I suppose if you came on and said, what was your median LSAT last year? When is your application deadline? I'm thinking about applying early decision. When do I have to have it in by? And all that is on the website. It would be a little annoying just because we're busy. So try to take a look at that and see if you can get your questions answered. And then if you still have them, feel free to join us.
Yeah, that's nice of you. That's cool that you're offering that. We had one question in the chat, and I get the sense that a lot of those more personal, specific questions are just folks who are kind of concerned about their background, concerned about their situation, and they're looking to know what should they be doing to present themselves in the best possible light or address any open questions. For example, we had one in the chat from somebody he's saying that he's URM and a splitter. So he's got a high LSAT score, relatively lower GPA, or maybe even vice versa, high GPA, low LSAT. And so in a situation like that, where there's a big disconnect between LSAT and GPA in either direction, what should somebody do? And maybe we should discuss those separately. But I guess the idea is when there's a big difference in those numbers. Yeah,
well, I guess I would first say that the majority of students that enroll, at least with us, are splitters, right? And also the second thing I would say is, before I get in to answer your question, is that it should be pretty easy for anybody who has an LSAT and a GPA to look online. We provide that data to the LSAC. They have a platform, right, where you can plug yourself in and say, within this range, relatively narrow range, last year there were 30 applicants, right? Out of 6,000, I've now narrowed myself down to 30, and I see that 2 got in, or I see that 26 got in, or I see that 15 got in. And from that, you instantly know that boy, this isn't looking good, right? I mean, or yeah, I've got a 50-50 shot, or wow, this should be a slam dunk. This is pretty much a safety school for me. Yeah, I want to be serious about it, but I'm going to, get the best recommendations and proofread my personal statement, but by and large, I have a good chance of being admitted. So you have to start from that premise and be realistic about where you're applying. And I encourage everybody to apply to those schools where, yeah, it was 2 out of 30. Take those chances, especially if that's a school you want to go to. But you also got to apply to some schools where it was 25 out of 30, so that you're going to have some good options. Again, these are all schools that you've researched that you think are going to be good fits. But so if you start that way, I think you're going to have a decent cycle. Then you go, okay, now how am I going to best present myself for the school where I have the 2 out of 30 chance, or where the odds are less likely. And there's limits to what you can do, right? You can't recreate, you can't take stuff out of thin air, and every case is different. So I could just imagine so many different scenarios. Like you say, okay, somebody has a high LSAT and low GPA. Well, maybe they're 30 years old or 35 years old, and they've been out of college. They didn't take college seriously, but they've had a whole career, and they've now done well on the LSAT. Well, an admissions committee may look at that and say, clearly we think that the grades are not as indicative as somebody who just graduated. They've proven themselves through a career, through a LSAT, through the LSAT. But you could also imagine a situation where somebody just graduated and says, yeah, I didn't take college very seriously and did well on the LSAT. Well, the committee might believe that, but they might be more inclined to admit somebody who's been out of school for a while and who's had a whole career and has matured. And, I could come up with 1,000 different scenarios, but all you can do is present your case in the best possible light, but just recognize that there's a lot of splitters that are admitted to law school.
That's good to hear. Yeah. So in terms of splitters and just in general, folks, what could they be doing in terms of the other parts of the application for UCLA specifically? Even we got a question about the optional essays. You mentioned optional essays for things like standardized test scores or even other soft factors like letters of rec. What should folks be looking to do to optimize those?
Well, so one thing that is very UCLA specific, there is a question which says, are there any of our programs that you're particularly interested in that you think you could contribute to? Don't try to make something up there, but if there is something you're specifically interested in, sure, feel free to share that with us and the committee, because we're looking to bring in a very diverse group who are going to have a wide variety of backgrounds and interests in our programs. So feel free to share that. But beyond that, and don't just answer optional questions, try to come up with something to say. But if there is something that you feel you want to say based on your academic performance or your standardized test taking, by all means, that's why we ask them. Now, beyond that, I've been doing this a long time, and I wish I had some amazing advice, right, with regard to letters of recommendation, but it's really pretty simple. You need to reach out to the people that you think know you really well, have seen you demonstrate the skills you're going to use in law school and as a lawyer, and get them to write you the best possible strong letter of recommendation you can. And most letters that we get are good, but there are some every year that are not so good. And so if you're approaching somebody and they don't seem really enthusiastic about it, then I would move on. And then there are some that are just stellar, right? They really go into detail. They clearly know this applicant. And they say things that are just, incredible. And those are few and far between too. So you just try to get the best ones you can. And right, like when you're in that group, right, where 50% of the people with those numbers are getting in, that's where those things make a difference, right? Your letters of recommendation, your personal statement, any of our programs you're interested in, your interest in the school, your work experience, any obstacles you've overcome, leadership positions you've held, community service, public service. Those are all the kinds of things that the committee is taking a look at.
Right, right. So I guess a big takeaway I'm getting from this, at least, which kind of confirms my understanding, is that numbers play a big role, obviously, but there is a certain amount of space for those edge cases where these soft factors could push somebody over the edge, especially relative to somebody else who didn't have quite so compelling letters of rec or those optional essays or just the resume.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, numbers play a role for a number of reasons. One is that the whole point of the LSAT is it's supposed to predict how you're going to do in the first year of law school. But that's it. Not what kind of lawyer you're going to be, not how you're going to do beyond that. And obviously, there's always exceptions to that. But also, the Law School Admissions Council reports these scores in bands for the very purpose that law schools should not be making decisions based on small differences in scores. So we try not to do that. On the other hand, we're ranked based on these things, and prospective students seem to care about rankings. Employers seem to care about rankings. So we got to pay attention to rankings. And it's sort of a double-edged sword, right? Because you got to pay attention to what now it's not your average, so that's good. It's just your median. So you have to pay attention as to what your medians are. But that's nice because once you're below the median, which half your class is going to be, that's what a median is, you can focus on a lot more of these factors because they're not going to impact rankings like if it was an average.
Right, right. It makes a lot of sense. And I appreciate you bringing up the point about the score band, because there is that margin of error or score band of 3.5 or so points on each end. So right. A 163 could have also been a 160, could have also been a 166. There's that element of luck, which is why I think at least that you don't need to take the LSAT only once. You could retake it and through luck alone, do a few points better. And if not, as you said, typically there's that weight on the higher score. So
yeah, exactly.
It's worth taking into consideration.
And the unfortunate thing is that despite that, depending on where you're falling in a school's applicant pool, it can matter because of rankings. And so that's just something, again, people just have to understand what the process is and how it is. And if you do your research right and you're applying to a range of schools, you're going to have great options when you're done.
Yeah. Yeah. And we've got an applicant here in the chat who's clearly done her homework. She's got a question regarding a super specific essay, I imagine is for the UCLA application, the programmatic contribution essay. Does that sound familiar to you?
That does, yeah.
All right. So she's asking for that essay, and maybe you could speak about what this essay involves. Does one need to be already experienced in that area of law, or is this a space for new ideas that are not necessarily based on past experiences?
Yes, the latter, right?
The latter.
I mean, it's either or. If you've worked in the environmental law field and you're interested in our Emmett Institute on climate change and the environment, sure, talk about that. But if you haven't had any direct experience, but you're interested in going into environmental law, talk about that. You don't have to know what area of law you want to go into when you're applying to law school. And many people that think they know may change their mind, just like you did, just like many people do in college. They go in thinking they're going to major in one thing and then they change their mind. And unlike college, you don't have to specialize at all. But we offer a lot of programs. So if there's something you're interested in, tell us and tell us why. And you don't have to have had specific experience.
Right. Right. That's good to hear. That's nice that folks can kind of share their ideas and hopes and goals for the future.
That's why we ask it. Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, Rob, this has been a great conversation. I feel like we've covered a lot of major points here for the evening. Is there anything else you want to share with prospective applicants before we sign off?
Wow, that went by quick. So
yeah, this was a great conversation.
Yeah, no, we're here. If you have questions, email. I don't know if people have my email or not. I guess I could put it in the chat. Should I do that?
Yeah, sure, definitely.
All panelists and attendees. So if you want to follow up, we can set you up on one of these. Tours. And
we got a question. When are those tours happening?
Well, right now they're happening generally on Mondays and Friday mornings. There you go. That should be it.
So they're happening at this moment in August right now. Folks could sign up for one.
Yeah, you can sign up now. If you want to wait a little bit to kind of go on a tour with a student and then have an admissions person afterwards, we're hoping to get that going in September once the semester starts. What I don't know yet is whether or not we'll be able to have people observe a class. I hope so, but it's going to be up to the faculty, and they may not go for it given the remote learning, but hopefully we'll find some that will allow that too. So if somebody wants to observe a class, take a tour, I'm hoping we'll be able to do that, but we'll know more in September.
That's really cool. Well, I definitely encourage folks to reach out to you to sign up for those tours, to then get the opportunity for those calls as well. And you got the forums, LSAC forums happening as well.
Yeah, it was great to see you, Steve. Thanks for doing this.
No, great to see you as well, Rob. Thanks so much for joining and for sharing all your insights with all the applicants. Really appreciate it.
Sure.
Well, thanks again for joining, and thanks for all the great questions, everybody. Good night. Thanks for tuning into the show. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already to be notified of new episodes as I release them. And feel free to reach out if you need anything at all as you move forward with your prep. I'm happy to help however I can. In the meantime, I'll wish you all the best and take care.